So a few months back, I was doom scrolling on Instagram, wouldn't recommend, and I came across a video of someone sitting on their kitchen floor crying. I clicked on the comments and holy moly, to say that the atmosphere was unsympathetic would be an understatement. It was downright hostile. Now, let's put aside the strange, sad fishing setup of the whole thing. I acknowledge that filming oneself crying and then posting it online is something that would be inexplicable to a medieval peasant. I wouldn't recommend it to a friend. But the comments weren't all about that. In fact, most of them were about something else, saying that she had it coming and rejoicing in her sadness. Now, what did this person do to deserve such vitriolic mockery online? At first I was sad, then I saw poly. It was a poly, of course it failed. Womp womp, polyamory L, Clowntown population U. Wow, a failed poly. What a surprise. Be polyamorous. There's a lot going on here. The internet has gotten too mean. It feels like people have gotten meaner. Anonymity and disconnect emboldens people to say things that they would never have the guts to say in real life. At least I hope. I also can't help but notice that most of the comments seem to be coming from people who appear to be men. Why didn't you post the argument online? Would love to know his side. Oops, someone missed the lesbian and WLW hashtags. Or perhaps he just doesn't know what a lesbian is. But the aspect I want to focus on today is the hatred towards this person being polyamorous, because it isn't exclusive to the comment section of this video. People really have beef with poly people.
Me losing all respect for someone the moment they say they're polyamorous. Oh, you're poly? Yeah. We have literally nothing to talk about. You can leave me alone forever. This is how polyamorous people look to me.
Happy Valentine's Day. My name is Mooknee and this is the only channel on YouTube where all videos are written and produced by a cow. She couldn't be in the video today because she's actually hosting a Galentine's event, but if you... Wait, she didn't invite me. That is rude. Cancel her. But if you like this video and subscribe to our channel, she might appear in the next video. I don't know. The word polyamory is on people's lips, especially of late. And despite the premise of this video, social awareness of polyamory is growing. But it's no new thing. The practice of non-monogamy exists across the world. You'll see that today that a lot of the representation of these kinds of relationships, you know, in the mainstream media and the press tends to be focused on middle class and upper income North Americans. But representation does not always reflect reality. In fact, it often doesn't. Ask a poly person to define polyamory. Each of them will give you a different answer. Cat Black has a wealth of videos and insight on polyamory and was my online introduction to it.
I'm polyamorous and I wanted to talk about what polyamory means to me personally. For me personally, polyamory is not about having multiple sexual partners. It's about having love for more than one person and being able to maintain that romantic love with more than one person. I sort of look at my capacity for love like a glass and the water in the glass as love. And I think that my glass is a little bit larger than a lot of other people's, so I'm totally capable of having multiple commitments to more than one person. And no, I'm not polyamorous because I couldn't find somebody to be monogamous with me. In fact, I kind of realized that I was polyamorous when I was in a monogamous relationship, and I realized that it was totally possible for me to love another person, and I would be totally comfortable with my partner also loving another person. What I've appreciated about polyamory is it allows me to appreciate my partners for their very own unique qualities, as opposed to resenting them for not being my absolute everything. I have 4 long-term partners and I'm very, very happy.
Now, I think it's important to define my terms to avoid any misunderstanding. So let me do so. So poly comes from the Greek word for many and amory from the Latin for love. Poly, many, plus gamy, marriage equals polygamy, i.e. multiple spouses. Polygyny, when a man has multiple wives. Polyandry, when a woman has multiple husbands. Polygamy is illegal in most places. Just because someone is polyamorous doesn't mean they're pro-polygamy. And even if they are pro-polygamy, they may not advocate for it on religious grounds, but more that polyamorous relationships can be recognized under the law. Nonetheless, I'm solely going to be focusing on polyamorous people today, not polygamists. The people I'll be referring to will mostly be in North America, because most of my sources are in English, and as a classic uncultured Brit, I only speak English, I do. That's my cultural reference. I am trying to learn Simlish though.
Bleep globe, baba gadloo, gloopsy, grabandoopy, greeboken, dobin snoke. Group gob, gavin stoopy.
Oh, and this distinction between married versus unmarried does not apply to the word monogamous. We use monogamy, one plus marriage, to refer to any arrangement where two people only commit romantically to each other, regardless of whether they are married or not. Ambiamorous is a term to describe people who are content with both monogamous and polyamorous relationships. Some people who are polyamorous define it as a big part of their identity, whereas some people just refer to it as a relationship style that they happen to practice. Polyamory allows for multiple romantic and sexual connections, whereas open relationships are typically defined as a relationship where two people romantically commit solely to each other, but allow for sexual explorations with others. Swinging is an example of this. There's also the term monogamish, coined by author, columnist, and gay activist Dan Savage, which is mostly monogamous with a little squish around the edges. Basically, polyamory is a form of non-monogamy, but not all non-monogamy is polyamory. I know, this is a lot. Bear with me, I just want to avoid any misunderstandings. Because often when people criticize polyamory, they're often criticizing something else entirely. I've seen people say things like, oh, it's bad and that's why it's illegal. Polyamory isn't illegal, at least where I live, and likely where you live too. Polygamy is a different thing. I could go on for aeons introducing you to a plethora of terminology. Hierarchical polyamory, non-hierarchical polyamory, polyfidelity, solo polyamory, comet partner, metamor, polysaturated, relationship anarchy, compersion, kitchen table polyamory. Are you overstimulated? There's a lot, okay? But if you're polyamorous and you're watching this, you probably know all of this already. And if you're not and you're watching this, you might be starting to get a little bit lost. I don't think you actually need to know the minutiae. This video isn't running defense for polyamory as a practice. That's actually not the point. I want to explore why a lot of people online and in real life seem to hate polyamorous people. The people. I make this distinction because I do believe that there are merits in criticizing the behavior of non-monogamous individuals. You know, there are people who practice non-monogamy unethically. Unethical non-monogamy.
I am polyamorous myself, but yeah, there's a lot of unethical polyamory. And this particular subsect I like to call Pokemon trainers, because there are people that make spreadsheets, and that's because that's what's best for their brain. But when you are making a spreadsheet because you have to, because without it, you cannot keep track of all of your partners, that's a problem in my mind. Like, if you are referring to people and your partners as resources, that's a huge problem, huge red flag for me. It shows me that you want to be popular over caring for your partners.
It's okay to talk about your bad experiences where you felt coerced or where you were dating someone and they didn't disclose it. You're allowed to talk about these experiences and criticize people's behavior and hold them accountable. I will say it's important to remember that in every philosophy, there are people who practice it imperfectly, you know, feminism, veganism. So tarring the whole group with a negative brush is not fair in my opinion. Now, I'm going to introduce you to one more term, consensual non-monogamy, i.e. any arrangement where people have multiple consensual romantic, sexual and/or intimate relationships. So why would anyone take issue with what consenting adults do in their own relationships and bedrooms, you might ask? Great question. It's almost like I wrote it. Well, their issue appears to be that allegedly, they're ugly.
It's the well-known fact that you don't see many incredibly attractive people in polycules.
Challenges made me realize I don't hate polyamory as a concept, just hate when ugly people do it.
Why do people in open relationships always look like that? I'm being very non-specific here, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have a working theory on this, okay? And it's kind of mean, it's not my idea, don't shoot the messenger here. I saw some meme once upon a time that was like, somebody will have an open relationship just so they can date 3 threes and say they're in a relationship with a 9. Unfortunately, I don't know if that's how the scale, which is nonsense, really works. You know, it's not like a cumulative thing. Guys, I just don't know how this shit's happening. It's like the most confusing thing in the world to me. You've rarely seen like an 8, 9, 10 in an open relationship. That's all I'm saying. Why do people in open relationships always look like that? I'm being very non-specific here.
No, because what do you mean by that?
Welcome, it's a freak show, and you get a freak, and you get a freak. To call this discourse would be generous, and bear in mind I regularly use the word discourse as a pejorative, mockingly. Because I am a relentless mocker. As I'm sure you suspected, I was cool and popular in school.
Because tonight will be the night that I will fall for you over again.
I was one of those popular kids who would make fun of you for normal human behaviour, like drinking out of a water bottle or reading. Kids are mean. Correction, adults engage in mocking. In case you're employed, there's been discourse for a while now about how polyamorous folks look a certain way. They have a look. You know, the look.
Like that. I'm being very non-specific here, but you know exactly what I'm talking about.
They look like that. This TikTok about poly people and the aftermath of it, I think, is a really good case study in how there's such an appetite to dunk on polyamorous people, especially online. He posted the first one, got responses, and then, as I showed you, made a second one where he made a compilation of all the people who responded. And as you could see, a lot of them were gender non-conforming, plus size, and alternative looking. He even included someone who isn't even polyamorous, just non-binary, so they made the cut. You know, he likes to claim that this is all a joke, but if you look at the comments he's liked comments implying that polyamorous people are weak, and obviously has an issue with it. Now, we could debate about how much responsibility he bears in all this. I think some irresponsible platforming has occurred. There were people who got harassed as a result of this.
People in open relationships always look like that. I'm being
No, because what do you mean by that? Honestly, what do you mean by that? Now,
he was liking unkind comments about the people in the video, even though it was just a joke. You know, people commenting saying, oh, where's their profile? I want to find them. The person who got most targeted even made a follow-up video, and he commented saying, oh, sorry, it's just jokes. And they sort of responded saying, you know, and they were saying, I get that, but like the result of it has been harmful, and, you know, autistic and non-binary people have been targeted. And I'm sure him and the people who have enjoyed this will say, you know, it's not that deep. But I think this really demonstrates the contempt people have for polyamorous people, especially because the most vocal people online are queer-coded. A lot of queer people practice polyamory. Non-binary people, neurodivergent people. He can claim all he likes that this is just a joke, and, you know, the people who have been upset by this and have received harassment as a result need to just laugh it off. And even if you could give some charitability to the first video where you're like, oh, it's just a joke, that's probably a bit too mean for your taste, I think this next video just completely lays bare what he thinks about the people he's joking about.
I made a lot of people in open relationships mad yesterday, didn't I? A lot of polyamorous people, a lot of non-binary folks, kind of getting equally offended. But there's an interesting piece to that. See, some of these people didn't give a shit. Some of them were laughing about it. A lot of them were DMing me and laughing about it. Well, why? Why would they laugh at themselves? Because they don't identify or think that they are part of the group that look like that. They're the ones that aren't getting offended by this because they hear the joke and they go, ha, that's funny, that's not me. And a lot of them it's not, because here's the really important part to this. The ones who don't look like that, the ones who look normal, so to speak, they don't advertise this stuff. Why don't they advertise it though? Because as many of them told me, if you advertise that you are open, poly, non-monogamous, whatever, then people who look like that start hitting you up incessantly.
Oh, so it's fine as long as if you don't look like that. Whereas if you do actually look like that, then it's fair game. Gotcha. And listen, you know me, I like jokes, I like a goof, I like a gaff. So if you've been around since the days where I looked like Jim Carrey from Dumb and Dumber, you know, when I first heard that joke of, oh, polyamorous people have a certain look, like, you know, in jest, I did sort of exhale through my nostrils. Because, you know, septum piercings.
Sir, will you please stop staring at me? Where's the rest of you?
Vegans have a look. We can all have a jolly about that. If you can chuckle and move on without forming contempt for polyamorous people in the world, great. But people are taking this too far. There's light-hearted jokes, and then there's, how is every poly person ugly? Every poly person I see on TikTok looks like they smell like the water left in the pot after you boil hot dogs.
The funniest part about media portraying polyamory is they always try to use attractive people instead of the moist, foul-smelling, flesh beasts of size from Portland. Polyamory is almost exclusively practiced by.
What I'm about to say might seem pretty obvious, but isn't this just old-fashioned bullying? Actually, on second thought, I've realised that I probably am just being too sensitive. You know, I actually think it's really funny when random strangers come up to me online and say that I stink of poo-poo and steaming horse piss and more poo-poo with some hot dogs. That's actually really funny. Anyone would find that really funny. There's something so incredibly normie about hating on someone for being ugly. It's basic. Homo sapiens are so evolved in so many ways. Like, you know, we've invented vaccines, the iPhone, we've stepped on the moon, but we still can't get over our instinctive disgust reaction when we see someone that we wouldn't want to reproduce with. What's that about? There are many video essays on discrimination against ugly people and pretty privilege. I just want to majorly stress the air quotes on the use of the word ugly in this video.
People who are uniquely beautiful, who are not traditionally pretty, who then decide to go outside of the realm of normal and do a unique hair color, unique makeup, and fashion that may not be normalized, will always bring out the absolute scum of the earth. People who are 100% trash will drag themselves out of the gutters. They will come out from underneath the rocks that they are living under and leave the most heinous comments. And for what? To hurt a stranger's feelings who are just trying to get their hair done? Like, what did you get from this? You don't have any superpowers. It doesn't make you any better. If anything, it makes you worse. So what is the point of these comments? Please tell me. To top that off, most of these people are full-grown adults, and you guys should be so ashamed of yourselves. I'm embarrassed for you. This isn't even second or third hand embarrassment. This is like fourth and fifth hand embarrassment.
If I were to say, you don't hate polyamorous people, you just hate ugly people, that wouldn't capture the whole truth. And I can't help but notice that the poly people who are being called ugly are visibly queer.
A lot of non-binary folks kind of getting equally offended.
There is no right or wrong way to look gay, but there are signals you can send to send the gays your way.
Now, with that in mind, I think when people are mocking poly people for having that look, look. It isn't simply a personal disdain for ugliness. It's a political position, video essayist core. Because looking like that represents a political position that you don't agree with. A way of life that you don't agree with. A definition of conservatism: commitment to traditional values and ideas with opposition to change or innovation. That goes hard. 8 or 9 years ago, when a fella saw someone online with blue hair and a septum piercing, they would call them an SJW, social justice warrior. This isn't that different. Being polyamorous doesn't necessitate being liberal or left-wing, but there is a trend, there's a correlation. For some queer polyamorous folks, their queerness and their polyamory are intertwined. So in 2018, social psychologist Dr. Rhonda Balzarini carried out a study along with her colleagues at the University of Western Ontario, studying the demographic backgrounds of 2,428 polyamorous individuals and 539 monogamous ones by asking participants to take an online survey. Her team found that polyamorous people tend to identify more as bisexual/pansexual, are more likely to report being divorced, and make less money yearly than monogamous couples. Only slightly more people who were in poly relationships reported having a bachelor's degree or higher and identified as Democrat. When it came to political affiliation, polyamorous folks often chose other, writing in anarchist, progressive, democratic socialist, and none. There were no major differences between groups when it came to ethnicity, except that respondents in poly relationships were significantly more likely to identify as multi-ethnic and native. It isn't a shock that conservatives are less likely to outwardly identify as polyamorous. They may, do some non-monogamy, they may swing in secret, but embracing polyamorous as a label is a different thing. Oh, as a side note, I had to share this because it was so interesting. In my research, I found that there is a peculiar exception to this general rule. Loving More is a non-profit founded in 1984 with the purpose of advocating for polyamorous people. Its purpose is described as follows: to educate people about and support polyamory as a valid choice in loving relationships and family lifestyle. It was founded by a woman called Ryam Nearing and her 2 husbands. Historian Christopher M. Gleason states in American Poly, a book on the history of polyamory in North America, Nearing was uniquely suited to fight for ethical non-monogamy with the cultural climate of the Reagan era. He states that Nearing was pro-family, pro-fidelity, and a fiscal conservative. Joined by Deborah Anapol, a polyamorous clinical psychologist, Nearing presented a form of non-monogamy that did not chide conservative reverence for family values. Non-monogamy could be the loyal spouse's helpmeet, they argued, a release valve that might keep a frustrated wife or husband from blowing the roof off the entire institution. Fascinating. Putting that aside, generally, at least in North America, polyamory was and is countercultural. 3 years ago now, I made a video on amatonormativity, which in short is the cultural notion that all people want to be in a romantic relationship, and that is how one achieves a fulfilled life. It's really helpful in understanding aromanticism, but also in part polyamory. Because under amatonormativity is the prescribed idea that a person should find the one, their other half, i.e. a single romantic partner to complete them, aka mononormativity. Monogamy is the default. There is also the concept of the relationship escalator, the default set of societal expectations for intimate relationships, i.e. the goal at the top of the escalator is to achieve a permanently monogamous, sexually and romantically exclusive between 2 people, cohabiting marriage, legally sanctioned if possible. In many cases, buying a house and having kids is also part of the goal. Partners are expected to remain together at the top of the escalator until death. Polyamory challenges this. The "are we exclusive" chat happens quite differently. You may live with and co-parent with more people. Your goal might not to be with a certain partner forever. This is countercultural, at least where I'm from, and probably where you're from too. And if I haven't already rubbed some people the wrong way, here's where it gets extra dicey. Polyamory does not necessitate queerness, but some describe it as a queer practice. Wait, let me finish. I'm not saying that if you're monogamous and LGBT that you're some heteronormative, sellout, assimilist shill or whatever. There's straight people who practice polyamory. In fact, some aggressively straight people practice it. If someone who is cis-het says that they're queer simply because of polyamory, yeah, I can see why that rubs people the wrong way. You know what? Here's someone who made some very interesting points. Better than I could have.
A lot of the times, I feel like people justify ostracizing marginalized demographics just because they can. I think people don't view polyamorous people as marginalized, even though they are. In a similar way, I feel like aromantic, asexual people, intersex people are marginalized, but because we don't fit into a specific demographic, we're kind of othered. And I think polyamorous people are similar. At the same time, we are still marginalized because we go against the grain of like what's expected in society, and we're treated differently because of it. You know what I mean? And a lot of times there's overlap in these ostracized, marginalized groups with neurodivergency, queerness, fatphobia, disability, etc. And a lot of you guys use this othering as a way to justify your ableism, fatphobia, queerphobia, what have you. And so I want to hop on here because I'm seeing a lot of different people come on here and be like, hey, this is fucked up. And then people are like, well, of course you'd say that. You look exactly like the stereotype of polyamorous people. But I don't. And I'm still polyamorous. And I implore you to really sit with yourself and invoke why you feel the need to laugh amongst others and why you feel the need to put yourself in a superior complex and put others in an inferior complex, especially when it doesn't harm themselves or others. You know what I mean? Like, how does someone else's decision, lifestyle, and ability to love multiple people affect you? And why does it bother you enough to bully them? Genuinely.
So not all polyamorous folks are queer. There are some hetero poly people, okay? I would say, personally, that polyamory is not a sexual orientation, but a relationship orientation. But there is a reason that LGBT people historically have been more open to non-monogamy, or at least reported to be. Important historical context, because being gay was illegal in the US, gay people practiced non-monogamy, at least in part due to not being free to legally embrace their partners and openly. That is a point that I need to acknowledge. However, there is something to be said about how people who are already challenging the societal norm in who they date and how they look may be more likely to challenge the societal norm of how they date, i.e., how many people. Queerness, in many ways, is about loving outside of the norm, and polyamory can run in parallel to that definition. Queerness and the ability to explore what type of relationships you want to have in the world, those two go hand in hand. You're exploring who you are in the universe, but you're also exploring how you relate to other beings in this universe. So it's no surprise that the conservative opposition to polyamory and or consensual non-monogamy is closely related to their aversion to queerness and deviant romantic and sexual behavior. Whether a poly person is queer or not, I think conservatives who look at it and go, ew, see it as the same thing. Also, I can't help but notice that the negative things people say about poly people mirror the things that people say about bisexuals.
Greedy, choose one.
I don't know though, because too much bisexual pride leads to this. Verity Ritchie has a PhD in bisexual law, and in her video, Why We Hate Bi Women, it inspired the title of this video. There's also an equivalent on bisexual men. In fact, the video is even more relevant than I remembered, because there's a whole chapter on non-monogamy and how it's associated with bisexuality. So yeah, just to be clear, what I'm about to say is massively like summarizing and condensing and narrowing in on just one aspect of the whole video. She argues that people's aversion to bisexual women comes from the association with sex. sex, sexual promiscuity. When a woman says she's bisexual, there's an instant association with multiple sexual partners, men and women. They become hypersexualized. I believe the same association happens when someone says that they are polyamorous, not just non-monogamous, because people forget that it isn't just about sex. Polyamory. To be clear, having lots of consensual sex is fine, but you know, society, shrug. I think you also find this among people who are hypersexualized in society. If your baseline sexuality is seen as too sexual, then you might find that you're more free to challenge some of the sex negative concepts the society hypersexualizing you throws back at you. If you're already on the margins and derided by society when you're harming no one, it gives you a better way of looking at other practices which aren't harming anyone. Hence the aversion to people who look like that. Looking like that signals a way of life that you disagree with. It threatens them because having to question your life path requires thought, energy, and decision making. That's why conservatism isn't just a personal opposition to a different way of life, but political. Someone else living their life differently doesn't just challenge me personally, but the fabric of society that is safe and familiar to me. You can say that this is due to fear or envy. You know, they're secretly jealous, they would want to try this. That might be the case for some people, but I don't think that's the case as often. It plays into this trope that bigotry comes from envy, like, you know, the classic trope of the homophobic bully in school comes out. If you ask me, the truth is that some people are just bigoted. Well, there are reasons for it, but not being gay, for example. There's the just world fallacy, which is a cognitive bias that assumes that people get what they deserve and essentially that the universe is fair. I think this ties in here. Homophobia won't be solved by simply helping people embrace themselves and blaming gay people. And bigotry is just so much more complicated than that. And likewise, when people have seen poly people online being made fun of, some of the responses have been, oh, you're just jealous because you would want to try it. That might be true in some cases, but some people are just cruel, and that is much harder to work with and to rectify. Here's a theory, just a film theory, or whatever it is he says. Polyamorous folks are nerds, relationship nerds. In the US at least, it's the domain of nerds.
It's the well-known fact that you don't see many incredibly attractive people in polycules.
I mean, that's a dangerous group to piss off, because every one of them you piss off, they tell all of their...
They're like a matrix. F***ing nerds, you know? They're gonna come after me with their Funko Pops or whatever.
I know when people say, oh, they work at the Ren Fair and oh, they collect Funko Pops and play Dungeons and Dragons. They're often being derogatory, but they're not wrong. I just don't think those are bad things. I love nerds. I'm an ally to nerds. In fact, you could argue I'm a nerd based on the fact that I am a theatre kid, which is a genre of nerd, I'd say. Let's debate that in the comments. But yeah, I respect nerd culture. I finally saw The Lord of the Rings last year and I get the hype now. And it's not just that nerdy people practice polyamory, but that the work into making polyamory work requires studying. A member of the Boston Polycule featured in the New York Times had this to say: we learned a strategy from the multi-amory podcast called Agile Scrum, which was adapted from business meeting models. We utilized that format. We did that for a year and a half, at least once a month, sometimes 6 to 10 hours of hard poly processing. That gave us great communication tactics. I have no interest in going to grad school for relationships, especially when the other students sound so keen to be best in class. This keenness to study and schedule and have discussion groups goes some way to explaining the moniker sex nerds, which my friends and I began using a few years ago to express our benign derision, and a long way to explaining the temptation to bully them. Nerds have spent the past few decades triumphing in almost every aspect of American popular culture, and it's impossible to make them feel bad about it. It's futile incels complain about more superhero movies being made, but the classic tactic of saying that they are doing sex in a weird way remains available, especially when they're so eager to tell you about how they play Catan with their polycule every Wednesday. That's why, in part, why we see otherwise progressive people making fun of polyamorous people. It's also to do with the stuff I've already talked about, but I think this aspect particularly applies to the subsect of people who say, I don't have a problem with polyamory, but they annoy me. I think they're cringe. Which, to be clear, is a problem. Cringe culture is instinctive. I've participated in cringe culture myself. But yeah, I think people who tease poly folks tease them in part because to them, they're dorks. That's why people simultaneously hypersexualize them while finding their sexualness unsexy. Secrets are suddenly made unsecret, and so much is lost in translation and public consumption. No one wants to write a news article that comes from a place of horniness, and with that mentality, the subject becomes a punchline. It's icky when dorks do it. How dare they get more action than me? They really do, though. And for those who practice non-monogamy ethically, hell, they've earned it. Celebrating your lover while they marry their partner while supporting your lover's lover's lover while they go through it is an example of what Anna calls living life on hard mode. Some people like to run marathons. We like to do polyamory, complex relationship stuff. Sarah's favourite activity for the two of us is to do couples therapy, Nick says, smiling. Navigating the relationship dynamics is kind of generally a fun thing for us. It's like for relationship nerds. And to be clear, I'm not saying that polyamorous communities are unequivocally loving, accepting, and non-discriminatory networks free from petty politics and even discrimination. No, there's important conversations to be had about the whiteness of some poly circles, the relative discomfort and othering non-white people face, and the tendency to exoticize or fetishize non-white women especially. Class is also a discriminating factor. Even if it's unconsciously, it's kind of gate-kept from working class people because it's just harder to practice. You need free time, disposable income to go on more dates, costs of sexual health, a safety net. A polyamorous party can be starkly alienating for a working class, non-urban individual, especially if they're also the only person of colour in the room. This is a genuine problem that needs to be talked about and tackled. But despite what I believe is a very valid critique of parts of the poly community, especially the parts getting FaceTime with the media, as white, gender normative, and generally well-to-do, I don't think this means that working class poly people don't exist. We do. Or that poly is bad for social justice. Just because something requires more privileges to do so successfully doesn't mean that it is an unjust activity. The analogy I use for polyamory is healthy living. We all know that eating healthy food is generally a good thing to do, but access to the resources for that lifestyle can be costly and geographically circumscribed. A gym membership can be expensive for someone living paycheck to paycheck. Processed food is cheap and horrible for you, but for someone who is poor, it might be all there is. Anyways, back to dorks, nerds, geeks. Like the crossover with queerness, it's not a surprise that people who have lived life being socially outcast feel more free to join a community of romantic outcasts, which is why I feel protective of any kind of nerd. Whether it's someone who yaps about anime all day, or a polyamorous person who shares their love of their polyamorous life. They really are in a no-win situation, in my opinion, because people often talk about how polyamorous people are like an MLM and they're trying to recruit everyone. And of course there are situations where non-monogamous people pressure monogamous people to do it, of course, right? I'm not saying that isn't a problem that occurs. Manipulative people exist. But a polyamorous person talking about polyamory positively isn't automatically pressuring you to be polyamorous. If we only see the negatives of polyamory, the poly relationships that fail, it gives critics that confirmation bias to say, see, it never works when monogamous couples break up every single day. But if poly folks declare how happy it makes them, they're called pushy and part of an MLM. And I just don't think that's fair, because a lot of the people doing this are just trying to combat the stigma of polyamory. So yeah, you may meet someone who's polyamorous, who talks about it a lot. Making fun of them for just finding something that makes them happy makes you the villain.
I am cringe, but I am free.
Leanne Yao is a British polyamorous educator who I think had a really great response to the whole poly folks are ugly discourse. If you're a polyamorous person who is online, chances are you've been called ugly regardless of your actual perceived level of attractiveness. Instead of going, here's proof that me and my partners are actually hot, consider maybe polyamorous people are ugly. So what? I'm not saying I believe I'm ugly, but also, why would it matter if I was? Do you believe that ugly people don't deserve love? Or that only beautiful people can find and should find it? Does it make you insecure that I found love, especially with multiple people, as an ugly person? In many ways, I feel I am valued more as a person if I know someone isn't with me just because of my external qualities. I believe I am attractive to those who value me, not just for my body, but for my whole self. And that's enough. I don't need to prove my hotness to people in general. Also, people hate to admit this, but conventional beauty is temporary. If someone loves you for who you are as a whole person, that's worth more than being loved for being considered beautiful by some arbitrary societal standard. I'm grateful to have partners who are not only able to recognize the beauty I know I inherently possess, but who also don't value physical beauty as a reason to love me. So yes, maybe I am a polyamorous person who is ugly. I'm okay with that. And I hope that instead of getting defensive when people call you ugly, you can instead pity these people for trapping themselves in a system that would value something so superficial and temporary. Believe me, you are capable of seeking genuine connection beyond the physical, and you don't need to be considered beautiful by society to be loved and to be worthy of love. Well, that's just bloody lovely, isn't it? I didn't include the full post, so go check it out and go check out their work in general. I think anyone, regardless of whether they're monogamous or not, can take value from this. And also, it doesn't just apply to your romantic relationships, it applies to your friendships too. The physical is not what makes or breaks relationships. Remember that. So yeah, I wanted to end on that positive note. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to all the sources and polyamorous creators, for being vulnerable online, because as I'm sure I've established in this video, it's not easy to be openly poly online. So putting yourself out there to, represent and educate is really a net good for society. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, give it a like, because one like equals one picture of Siggy being stanky. Okay, so speaking of stanky, let's do today's subscription pet shoutouts. Thank you everyone for your submissions. There were so many that I ran out of Google Drive space, so thank you for that. So here is the first of the year, I think. Today's is a pygmy goat. Philip is a greedy hog, but he has a broken tooth too far back to remove, so he struggles to eat. Twice a day I have to clear his mouth and feed him a special slop so he gets all his nutrients. Despite this setback, and getting on in years, he is playful and curious. He loves scritches and play fights and breaking into the food shed. But he's also very clingy, crying when he's left alone for even a minute. I mean, if that doesn't deserve a round of applause. We love you, Philip. And thank you so much to my patrons. They got this video slightly early and there's some bonus content on there. My deleted videos are on there. My interviews from the pro-life march. If you're interested, but if you're not, then that's fine. And subscribe. Oh, and check out Fume, the sponsor of this video. So yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.